Hello, I'm Brandon Dutcher. I'm OCPA's Vice President for Policy, and I'm here today with Dr. J. Rufus Fears. Dr. Fears is the Dr. David and Ann Brown Distinguished Fellow for Freedom Enhancement here at OCPA, and he is going to do a 5-part lecture series in Edmond during the month of May entitled The Founder's Legacy of Freedom. It will be each Monday evening in the month of May, and details are at our website at ocpathink.org. And Dr. Fears, it's good to be with you today.
Delighted to be here, to be part of OCPA, to be the David and Ann Brown Distinguished Fellow, because from its inception, OCPA has been dedicated to the understanding of the founders of our country and the continuing legacy they give us of limited government, limited taxation, patriotism, and the participation of citizens in the determination of their own lives, and the freedom of the individual to pursue happiness. I believe that the election of 2010 is as crucial to our country as the election of 1860. I believe, and I think the facts bear this out, that we are as divided today as we were in 1860. And we are divided along sectional lines, geographical lines, but we are also divided along the lines of what are our fundamental freedoms, what are the political and moral foundations of our country. Now, Lincoln had pointed this out in one of his most famous early speeches, that we are a house divided. What Lincoln said was that all the armies of Europe, Asia, and Africa combined, with all of their treasure, with Napoleon Bonaparte as their general, could not land on the shores of the Atlantic and take a drink from the Ohio River. We would never be defeated by a foreign invader, but we would destroy ourselves because we are divided. And he said, a house divided against itself cannot stand. And we must take our stand, Lincoln said, on our sheet anchor, S-H-E-E-T, anchor of freedom, which is the Declaration of Independence. That, Lincoln said, is our main anchor. And with it, its principles of all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And in 1860, people had forgotten that fundamental unity of our country. And Lincoln said we must reclaim it. Let us hope we can do it this time by political action, by voting. That is what Lincoln also wanted. But we must remember it took a civil war, and that could have been avoided if both sides had been willing to sit down, rethink about our fundamental principles and how they ultimately unite us.
Well, and if they had forgotten those fundamental principles by 1860, I worry just how much more so we've forgotten them now, where I dare say our civic literacy is much worse than it was then. Not to mention, after decades of this soft despotism has transformed the American people, made us less self-reliant and more dependent on the state. Now we're really, it seems, at a crossroads, at a sort of a republic, if you can keep it, moment in American history.
Well, and it is very important to remember that in his Gettysburg Address, which Lincoln began with the Declaration of Independence, once again emphasizing his belief that that was the main anchor of our freedom, Lincoln said, our fathers. See, there were literally men alive in 1863 who had served in the army of George Washington. Robert E. Lee's father was a revolutionary soldier. Jefferson Davis' father was a revolutionary soldier. So they were much more in contact with the meaning of the founders and the importance of the founders than we are today. Secondly, they were much better educated in the meaning of the Constitution and what the Constitution said, what the Bill of Rights said. That has largely been driven from our schools. And in fact, instead of looking upon the founders as men of greatness and patriotism, today they're frequently portrayed in very dubious light. Whereas for both the Confederates and the Union, the founders were the authorities for what our American beliefs should be. So yes, we're further removed. Secondly, of course, Lincoln was a man of the frontier. He grew up totally self-reliant. We are now well into the third generation of those who believe that our main right is entitlements and that there are no responsibilities.
Well, given that, are you optimistic that we can reclaim the founders' legacy of freedom, or are we on a slippery slope towards becoming France? Or, perhaps you're not optimistic or pessimistic. The event is in the hand of God. What do you think?
I am very optimistic. I would say, as the Declaration of Independence did, that it will be the supreme judge which will ultimately decide. But I think that the fact that so many Americans have made clear their refusal to accept this medical bill and the higher taxes is a very encouraging sign. In point of fact, the British government lost its American colonies. It's the fairest part of the British Empire because it refused to listen to its constituents. George III and his cabinet, they were not tyrants. They thought they knew better than their constituents, and they thought their constituents needed to pay more taxes, needed a more centralized government that took more care of their individual interest, and believed that the rights of the individual colonies, like the rights of the individual states, were anachronistic. So they tried to force these acts down upon the American people and turn their most loyal subjects, as they had been in 1763, into a nation that was willing to change governments. So whenever a government thinks it knows better than its constituents, it is no longer a democracy. It is no longer a republic. It becomes a form of monarchy.
Well, it's interesting. It seems there are stirrings out there, the town halls, the tea parties, the gubernatorial elections in Virginia and New Jersey, the U.S. Senate election in Massachusetts. Perhaps those who would restrict our freedom have awakened a sleeping giant.
Well, and I have lectured on these topics in a number of cities, and I find that there is a hunger among many people in our country simply to understand what the founders said and then be able to apply it to today. One of the great dangers, as I see it, is both sides, or all sides, invoke the founders. So few politicians really know what the founders said. We have politicians that say that the Constitution declares that all men are created equal. It just does not. That's the Declaration of Independence. So when our political leaders know so little about the founders, then I worry. But I am optimistic because the American people want to know about the founders.
And no, they will if they come to Edmond every Monday evening in May. We'll look forward to seeing you then.